Bristol F.2b. Official confidence in the Bristol two-seater was restored once its combat technique had been established. Orders under the original contract were progressively augmented until a further 550 had been ordered by July 1917. These later aircraft embodied several modifications and were designated Bristol F.2b. The forward and downward view from the pilot's cockpit of the F-2A had been criticized. On the F-2B, the upper longerons were given pronounced downward slope from the back of the pilot's cockpit to the rear of the engine. This allowed the top decking ahead of the cockpit to be tapered upwards, thus improving the pilot's view. It also permitted the introduction of a larger petrol tank and ammunition box for the Vickers gun. The wing anchorage frame from the lower wing was built out to full airfoil section and covered, thus becoming a lower center section plane. These modifications were first made late in 1916 on A3304, the second F-2A prototype, which retained its original wingtips, tail skid, and the 150 horsepower Hispano-Suiza engine. Its radiator cowling had been slightly modified, and a scarf ring mounting was installed by the time it was revised to incorporate the main F-2B characteristics. The Bristol F-2B had new horizontal tail surfaces of greater span and higher aspect ratio than those of the F-2A. The first 150 aircraft had the 190 horsepower Rolls-Royce Falcon 1 engine, with the exceptions of A7177 and A7183, in which, respectively, the first Falcon 3 and Falcon 2 installations were made. Like A7183, the next 50 aircraft were fitted with the 220 horsepower Rolls-Royce Falcon 2. Apparently, this power unit was also fitted to a few later aircraft. The great majority of Bristol fighters were powered by the superb 275 horsepower Rolls-Royce Falcon 3, and in this form the aircraft remained in daily use until the armistice, and for many years beyond. The second RFC squadron to have the Bristol fighter as its equipment was number 11, which is in the process of changing from FE-2Bs to its new mounts in June 1917. By the end of July, number 22 squadron had also been re-equipped with Bristols. In September, number 20 squadron followed suit. From the time of its introduction into number 11 squadron, the potential of the Bristol F-2B was convincingly demonstrated by a young Canadian officer and his NCO officer, Lieutenant, later Major, A.E. McKeever, and Sergeant, later Lieutenant L.F. Powell, were almost certainly the finest two-seater crew of the war. Between the 20th of June, 1917, and January 1918, McKeever shot down 30 enemy aircraft. In January and April 1918, squadron numbers 62 and 88 went to France equipped with Bristol fighters, and helped cement the formidable reputation the redoubtable two-seater had required. Number 11 squadron's crews were finding that they could not induce the enemy to fight unless their Bristols flew in pairs or singly. No enemy formation would attack a group of 3 or more Bristols. No other aircraft of any nationality earned quite so much respect from their adversaries. And the last year of the war saw the Bristols victorious in many spectacular combats. In Palestine, number 67 Squadron, number 1 Squadron Australian Flying Corps, took over the Bristols of number 111 Squadron and flew the type with great success until the end of the war. From the spring of 1918 until the armistice, number 139 Squadron flew its Bristols with telling effect in Italy. 3 home defense squadrons, number 36, 39, and 141, were equipped with the Bristol F-2B. Other units had a few examples on their strength. As early as July 1917, it had been decided to re-equip all British fighter reconnaissance and corps reconnaissance squadrons with the Bristol F-2B. Orders for the aircraft were substantially increased, and from November 1917 onwards, Bristols were ordered from several additional contractors. Well over 5,250 Bristol F.2bs were ordered under wartime contracts. 3,101 of these had been produced by the end of 1918. Of these, 2,202 were built by the parent company up until 11th November 1917. With production planned on such a scale, it was obvious that the supply of Rolls-Royce Falcon engines would not suffice to meet the demand. It was decided that the Falcon-powered Bristols should be allocated to the fighter reconnaissance squadrons, and that those intended for the corps squadrons should be fitted with alternative engines. On the 1st of August 1917, General Pershing recommended that the Bristol F.2b should be produced in the United States, powered by the 200-horsepower Hispano-Suiza engine. 2 weeks later, A-7207, a Bristol F.2b that had seen service with No. 22 Squadron, was shipped to the USA as a sample aircraft. It arrived at the Smithsonian Institution, Washington, on 5th September 1917, accompanied by a part set of design drawings. Colonel V.E. Clark, a member of the Bowling Commission, undertook the task of completing the set of drawings. Unfortunately, he redesigned the aircraft to have a new and untested Liberty 12 engine, a power unit for which the Bristol was quite unsuited. It is not known who authorized this redesign, although the proposed installation of the 200-horsepower Hispano-Suiza had the approval of the Bristol design staff, being entirely compatible with the Bristol F.2b airframe. Those members of the Filton staff who went to the USA to supervise American production of the aircraft immediately recognized the complete unsuitability of the Liberty 12 for the aircraft. It seems that none of the Bristol objections to the Liberty were put in writing. Certainly the installation was proceeded with. The U.S. Aircraft Production Board recommended that 1,000 Bristol F.2bs should be ordered from the Fisher Body Corporation. But at the end of October 1917, this contract was canceled, and the order was placed with the Curtiss Airplane and Motor Company. On 7th December, it was doubled. The sample F.2b had been sent to Curtiss on 7th November 1917, and the first Curtiss-built aircraft was completed on the 25th of January 1918. Its first flight was made on the 5th of March, and by the 28th of March, the building of 400 aircraft had been authorized. Unfortunately, by that time, Major E.J. Hall of the U.S. Signal Corps had devised so many modifications of the original design that about 1,400 Curtiss production drawings were made obsolete, and production delays inevitably occurred. By this time, the U.S. version of the Bristol F.2b had been given the designation USA 01. The Liberty 12 installation was bulky and clumsy. The original side radiators obscured the pilot's forward and downward view, and were replaced by a radiator above the center section. After 3 crashes with the USA 01s, 2 of which were caused by bad workmanship, an official test of the type produced a substantial list of deficiencies. In April 1918, Lieutenant Colonel Vincent, the chief engineer, had fitted the sample F.2b, A-7207, with the only specimen of the American-built 300-horsepower Hispano-Suiza engine then in existence. Late in June, he sent it to McCook Field, where it flew as the P-30. The Air Board instantly recognized the far greater potential of this combination of engine and airframe, and suggested that Curtiss should abandon their Liberty-powered USA 01 in favor of the version with the 300-horsepower Hispano-Suiza. To this, the Curtiss Company objected strongly, but to no avail. The contracts for the 01 were canceled on the 20th of July, 1918. A second sample of the F.2b arrived from England on the 25th of June, 1918. It was engineless, for it was intended to have the 300-horsepower Hispano-Suiza fitted in the USA. It was ultimately flown with the 290-horsepower Liberty 8 engine at McCook Field, with the identity P-37. The further development of the P-30 and P-37 led to the U.S. XB-1 and XB-2, It is worth recording here, however, that in spite of all the extensive and unnecessary American modifications that were made to the Bristol F.2b design, no American variant was one whit better than Frank Barnwell's original. In the RAF, the Bristol served faithfully until 1932, performing tasks that had not been considered when it was first designed. It was one of the greatest airplanes of all time. Howdy, folks. Here's some additional information on the Bristol F.2b. Aside from the P-30 and P-37, in 1918, the Dayton Wright Company designed a modified version, designated as the B-1A or XB-1A, which used a 330 horsepower Wright Hispano engine in a new fuselage of wood veneer and monocoque construction. 3 prototypes were built by the engineering division at McCook Field, and a further 44 aircraft were built by the Dayton Wright Company. Many engine experiments were tried on the Bristol F.2b. One was the Wolseley Viper, which was a development of the Hispano-Suiza 8AB, which was developed for the Royal Aircraft Factory SE-5A. Here's serial number B1200 with a Wolseley Viper engine. And here's B1201 with a Royal Aircraft Factory 4D engine. And this is serial number C806 with a Sunbeam Arab engine with an early SE-5A type radiator. And here's another type of Sunbeam Arab installation. And here's C4655 with a Siddeley Puma engine. The only radial engine installation that I know of was a fighter built in 1923 with a Bristol Jupiter 425 horsepower engine. A little later it was sold to Sweden and joined their Air Force in 1926. It was taken to a mining town north of the Arctic Circle for an evaluation of tough winter conditions. And I don't know if you call that an O or a 0. So that's either an 06 or a 06, or maybe something else. I don't know. You tell me. A post-war civilian version, the Bristol Tourer, was an F-2b fitted with a Siddeley Puma engine in place of the Falcon, and with canopies over the cockpits. The Tourer had a maximum speed of 128 miles an hour.